organizers of this military-industrial complex weekend. I want to thank you for your tireless efforts on educating us, reminding us what happened 50 years ago when Wright Eisenhower, as a president, as a five-star general, wasn't he? Five-star. As a five-star general, had the common sense and the courage. Well, okay, he was a five-star general, he was president of the United States. I mean, if you don't have those two things, if you have those two things, and if you're not able to speak out what you really feel, I mean, when are you ever going to do it? Yeah. Well, I want to tell you why I'm keeping my hat on, and I'm look like I've been in a war. And in a way I have. I've been in an environmental war. I've, like so many people, you know, the climate changes and the intensity of the sun and all of those sorts of things really have, you know, they wear and tear on us. And I've been torn. I was in Houston this last week and had to have a bout with the skin cancer doctor. And so I'm leaving my cap on because I have a huge hole in the back of my head. I've got half of my ear off, and I've got my lip about gone. You'd think I'd been in a war. But it is a war. It's a climate war. It's a climate change war. And how does that affect? I mean, why are we talking about that in this military-industrial complex thing? I mean, it is the fact that the military is the greatest polluter in the whole world. Our military is the greatest polluter. We send out in every one of those tanks that I think takes 10 gallons to move a mile. The pollution from all of those tanks, the pollution from the bombs that we drop, the depleted uranium that we're still using, the costs of these wars that we're still in. Here we are now in year number 10 in Afghanistan, year number 8 in Iraq. It was 8 years ago that I did resign, and after, as Claire mentioned, I mean, all my adult life I've been in the government somehow, either in the military or the State Department. And like so many people that work in the government, I mean, it's not like everybody in the government believes every single thing that all these crazy administrations start trying to pull on us, but it's not really too often that we do have people that do resign. So what it has done for me, and you know, the title of my talk tonight is supposed to be kind of on conscience. Well, it was an act of conscience to resign, and then it is an act of conscience to be here with you all, to be here all over the country, to be wherever we can be together to challenge this military-industrial complex. Because it's you know, it is up to us, the people of conscience, and you know, it's not like just us. I mean, there are lots of people around the country, around the world, are concerned about these things. They are people of conscience, but rallying them together, trying to overcome the justifications that we're given for the need for this military, for this big industrial complex to feed the beast. This thing to, you know, it's kind of like the 3 B's. We've always got to be better. We've got to be bigger. We've got to be badder. And that just keeps feeding. Our military wants more technology, and they go to the corporations. And if what David was talking about, the numbers of corporations just here in Virginia that we have. But when we start talking about Lockheed Martin, oh God, I mean, I've got some stuff on the computer. Maybe I'll just read just a bit of it. Just to remind you of some of the unbelievable amounts of money that these corporations are getting. Let's see. Who do you think's number one? Who gets the most money from them as a military-industrial complex? Boeing. Just one second, I'm just about to get there. Yeah, how about Halliburton? Yep. Well, Lockheed Martin, $16 billion. Northrop Grumman, $11 billion. Boeing, $10 billion. Raytheon, $6 billion. SAIC is $5 billion. General Dynamics, $5 billion. KBR, another name for Halliburton, $5 billion. Booz Allen, Hamilton, $3 billion. Computers, CSC, $3 billion. Hewlett Packard, and this is just part of one aspect of their wealth. They have tons more money that's coming in different ways. Just besides the defense part of this, they are, they're very handy organizations. They can do everything. They can build computers for us. They can build missiles for us. They can build these drones for us. They can do anything that our military wants, or maybe the military doesn't even know it wants it yet. I mean, that's part of the problem with the military-industrial complex. And I think General Eisenhower was warning us about this. The military doesn't necessarily want all of this stuff, but all of a sudden there are other forces that are pushing, innovating, and coming up with things that, hey, Army, don't you need this new dense inert metal explosive bomb? Don't you need this one? I mean, this one will actually cut people in half. When it blows up, the tungsten from it will be atomized, and it'll cut up everybody in this room right here. They'll just be cut in shreds, but the people in the next room, they won't be injured. It's a very specific use. I'm sure you all can figure out how you can use this. And as a part of our internationalization of all of our military-industrial complex, we offer it to other countries. And then that one in particular was offered to the state of Israel and used for the first time on humans in 2009, in late 2008 and 2009, in the 22-day attack that the Israelis made on the people of Gaza, where the dime bomb was used on humans for the first time, and where white phosphorus, our white phosphorus, was used by another country on civilians. A justification, yeah, well, we've got it, we ought to use it. That's kind of the Dick Cheney approach, I think. If we've got it, we've got to use it, and we can always figure out the rationale for it, or we can come up with the psychological props so that we won't feel so badly about doing this. Just this last week, there was an article on Truth Out about the U.S. Air Force and its religious teachings in the Air Force. And in particular, this article was about the ethics of nuclear weapons. Yeah. Great, ethics, yeah. And justification, religious justification. And indeed, in that article, it cites verse by verse by verse all of the tenets of the Christian religion that were being used on these brand new nuclear weapons officers, so that it would relieve them of the responsibility of using these horrible, horrible weapons. And finally, it was some of those exact officers who were going through that training who thought, this doesn't make sense. Why, if we are a country where we do have separation of church and state, why is the Air Force, as a part of our training to be a nuclear weapons officer, why are they using these religious statements? And they're the ones that finally brought it to the attention of the press. And then the press took it, and now the Air Force has said they have to review all of their ethical teachings of nuclear weapons. So it is, Thomas Jefferson, he's the one that was talking about that, that we need to be careful. Be careful of how religion is used. Be careful of what is put upon us by this military-industrial complex. The religious arguments, and then of course there are always the economic arguments. That's really what's pushing us now. What if all of those corporations here in Virginia that David mentioned, what if they folded? Where will our people work? We've got to have those jobs. I mean, there are no other jobs possibly conceived in this world other than building those missiles and building those rockets and building drones and lots of ammunition. We've got to have that. What would we do if we didn't have those? I mean, what would we do?
Decriminalize hemp.
There we go.
Decriminalize hemp.
What would we do? What would we do? And how do we get our government to say that yes, there is another way to go about this? That the economic argument that we've got to keep these big corporations in business is not the argument. When they produce something that is really beneficial to the world, then fine, let them go ahead and stay in business. But you know, right now, we can't figure out how to get the government to say peace is profitable. They know for sure war is profitable. War is the biggest profit maker in the world. And we've seen it right now as America is on its knees financially. And we still have another administration that is refusing to acknowledge that those wars are really just undercutting every opportunity to have any sort of social programs, of education, of health. But it's the wars. The wars are the profitable things. So what is it that we do? I mean, and that is, let's see, which one of them? It was Eisenhower that says, how do you get the people to do this? It is the people's role in doing this. Well, how many of you all have been trying to do that the last 10 years? Yeah. How many of you all were marching as I went into Afghanistan, helping reopen the embassy in Afghanistan in December of 2001. How many of you all had already thought, you know, this military invasion and occupation is not really the way to go about this thing? How many of you all knew that? Yeah. And then how many of you all were on the streets before 2003 and 2002 and then 2003 in the greatest movement of humanity against war? Was against Bush's war, Blair's war. You were there. You knew what it was going to be. And you put your feet to the ground. You went out and marched. And you have been marching ever since. You've picketed. You've gone to your congressmen and women. You've written them emails. You've been in their offices. You've been arrested in their offices. How many of you all have been arrested in an office or in front of the White House? Yeah. Not that arrest is to keep in, but how many of you all have written emails, letters, made phone calls to the congressional offices or to the White House? How many have the number of the Congress on your speed dial of your phone? Yes. How many of you all, before you even have your bowl of Cheerios, you make a phone call to somebody in the Congress? Yeah, well, I know there are plenty of you because I get emails from you as we send out petitions on this and that, and then here comes an email. I did it before I even ate breakfast. Yeah, and we know that it works. We know that it's heard, not that it's worked, that we have ended the wars. It's been a singularly terrible time for us, where we now have two successive administrations who don't seem to really care what the public wants. They don't seem to care that we want these wars ended. We have a president right now who, as he got his Nobel Peace Prize, you know, in office barely 10 months, and he was given the Nobel Peace Prize. And let me just remind you some of the things that he said. Well, he said, for one, I'm closing Guantanamo. And that surely hasn't happened. The world recognized the need to confront Saddam Hussein when he invaded Kuwait, a consensus that sent a clear message to all about the cost of aggression. He did not mention one time Bush's war and Obama's war on Iraq. Furthermore, America cannot insist that others follow the rules of the road if we refuse to follow them ourselves. For when we don't, our action can appear arbitrary and affect the legitimacy of future interventions, no matter how justified. Yeah, what are those things? Things like torture, that still we have no accountability of the Bush administration on. Torture, that although there is a little bit of accountability moving around. I mean, when you have George Bush, who now cannot go to Switzerland, he had to cancel his little book trip up there, or out there. And then just this week, there was a small university in Toronto that for some, who knows how much they were going to pay him, but they figured if they could get him there, it would be a really big fundraiser for them. And they would be able to pay off whatever they paid him, and then they'd make a little money for the school. Except they forgot to tell anyone on the faculty and anybody in the student body that the board of directors were going to have George Bush up there as this fundraiser. Well, finally it came out. There were 3 professors that resigned over this. There were all sorts of faculties and student protests. And the university has had to back down. That George Bush will not be going to Canada. And I take particular delight in that one because it was George Bush's airplane that was on the ground at the Ottawa airport in 2006, I believe it was, when he was going to one of these, it was the trilateral meeting of Mexico, Canada, and the United States, that it was for security and prosperity. That was it, the Security and Prosperity Pact. Well, there were a few people that were saying, we don't think this is going to make us any more secure and definitely no more prosperous, what these guys are going to cook up, because they were, you know, the pipeline from the tar sands down through the United States, all through there, where so many, I mean, how many people, 1,000 people have now been arrested in front of the White House to protest this. How wonderful that is. In fact, have any of you all been to Washington during this? Great, wonderful, thank you. Well, at the time, they were talking about a special corridor that was going to go from Canada all the way down to Mexico. And people were, what are they going to put in this special corridor? It's trucks, you know, to bring Mexican goods to Canada or what? Didn't make sense, but, you know, now it kind of does. It probably is that exact route that huge pipeline would be carrying this extraordinarily toxic sludge that would be pumped out and ruining huge swaths of Canada, tearing it up, ripping it up, and then putting toxic materials in with the sludge, and it would be rolling down this tube all the way down into South Texas, and somehow it would be processed there. And you can only imagine how many breaks in that pipeline there are going to be with that. Well, Security and Prosperity, 2006. I went in there to help protest Bush's being there. Well, lo and behold, I got caught at the border at the Ottawa airport. And the fellow checking my passport went, have you ever been arrested? I went, well, not in Canada. And he went, well, have you been arrested in Washington, New York, California, Texas? I said, yeah, it's for peaceful, nonviolent protest of wars that your country at least had the common sense not to get involved in. You know, like Iraq, and I'm protesting torture and the extraordinary rendition of people who were put in prisons all over the world, including like one of your own countrymen, Maher al-Assad, who was put in who was taken, swept up in JFK airport, sent to Syria. He was tortured for 10 months, and they finally released him. The U.S. finally told the Canadians, oops, maybe we didn't quite have all the information, it was the wrong information. Maher al-Assad went back to Canada and sued the Canadians and got $10 million. Not much for all the torture that he had endured. I said, you know, you're paying as a taxpayer for what George Bush's policies did. And George Bush, his planes just landed here. I said, if you want, you know, you say I've been arrested. Yeah, I have been. He said, well, you're actually not going to be able to come into Canada because you've been arrested. We can't let you in. I said, well, I haven't done anything except protest the criminal acts that have been committed by George Bush, who's out in that airplane, so why don't you go arrest him? Well, of course, that didn't go anywhere. So now, where George Bush seems to be having a little bit of trouble coming into Canada, it does my heart good. Well, and you know, all of these policies, all these war policies that we've been trying to stop. John Judge made a comment just a minute ago about Ron Paul and what he said in the presidential debates, the Republican debates, just this last round of CNN's Tea Party debate. I mean, unbelievable. Well, it was really unbelievable, the reaction that Ron Paul got when he started saying the things that I think every one of us would agree with. It says, we're under great threat because we occupy so many countries. We're in 130 countries, now 148, boo. We have 900 bases around the world. We're going broke. The purpose of Al-Qaeda was to attack us, invite us over there where they can target us. And they've been doing it. They have more attacks against us and the American interest per month than occurred in all the years before 9/11. Wow. But we're there, occupying their land. And if we think that we can do that and not have retaliation, we're kidding ourselves. We have to be honest with ourselves. What would we do if another country, say China, did to us what we're doing to all of those countries over there? So it's this whole idea that the whole Muslim world is responsible for this, and they're attacking us because we're free and prosperous, and that's just not true. You know, that's the motto of the Bush administration, that they're attacking us for our way of life, for our freedoms. Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda have been explicit. They have been explicit. They wrote and said that they attacked America because we have bases on their holy land in Saudi Arabia, that we do not give Palestinians fair treatment, and that we've been bombing all sorts of places. And then he ends up, would you be annoyed? If you're not annoyed, then there's some problem here. Well, do you remember what happened when he said all of that? I mean, and how many of you all have thought those same thoughts? That we know why Al-Qaeda has been going after the United States. They've been very explicit with it. But our governments don't want to listen to them. They don't want to listen because that might mean that this big military-industrial complex would have to come to a screeching halt. That the cronyism that there is in the military-industrial complex, where it's a revolving door from generals who leave active duty and go straight into work with Grumman, Lockheed, Boeing. It's a real door that opens wide for them, and all of a sudden they're making $500 million. They are making tons of money out of this, out of their many years of service in the military, but then when they go over to work for the industrial complex, they're really rewarded very, very well. Of course, these corporations reward themselves in a lot of other ways too. All you have to do is get the politicians on your side and a couple of Supreme Court justices, and then all of a sudden you have instant personhood for corporations. Citizens United, one of the most awful Supreme Court decisions, I think, in the history of our country, where corporations now have the right to give limitless amounts of money to political campaigns. And you can bet your bottom dollar, and it doesn't take long to get to the bottom of our dollars, you can bet your bottom dollar that they are giving incredible amounts of money to these politicians. We know they are. It's one of the tragedies of the last 10 years. Not only is there, through the Patriot Act, the curtailment, unnecessary curtailment of civil liberties for us as Americans. I mean, we all want to be, protected. We want to make sure that if there is true crime committed, that people are held accountable for that. But the level of unnecessary intrusion into our lives is beyond the pale now. And then when you get the corporations now that have all the rights of citizens and have all the money. They've got the incredible amounts of money. The meltdowns that we've seen over the last 3 years, and all of a sudden corporations rising from the ashes and making even more profits than they were before the meltdown. Profits that are coming out of our monies, our tax monies. Hopefully they'll be repaid, but who knows? Who knows for sure how much we're going to get back from that. So we've got all of this, the landing pad for our military. They spend 20 years if they're enlisted, maybe 30 years. 30 years as an officer. They come out with 75% retirement. It's pretty good, isn't it? 75% of your base pay you get as your retirement when you're in the military. A very good package for health care. It's a sweetheart deal. And that's one of the reasons that I kind of joined up. When I was young in Arkansas back in the 60s, and I knew the one thing that I wanted to do, I didn't want to be a school teacher. I didn't want to be a homemaker. Didn't want to be a secretary. Didn't want to be a nurse. I wanted to go travel. And when the Army came to town saying, join the Army, see the world, and oh yeah, that Vietnam War, well, you as a woman, you won't have to go to that unless you volunteer. And I thought, well, I can put up with 2 years of that, 2 years of it, because that's all it was at the time, 2 years. I ended up staying 29 years, 29 years. And I'll tell you, I am getting a pension. I'm getting a pension for the U.S. military. And I'm plowing it right back into peace activities. So I think it's really ironic, and I'm quite surprised that at some point somebody hasn't, one of these congressmen who's demanded that we were arrested after we participated in the Gaza flotilla a year and a half ago, demanding that those 17 Americans that were on that first flotilla in 2010 that got shot up by the Israelis, that we should be arrested. Well, I'm surprised that that same congressman didn't say, and that for that Colonel Wright, we got to take her pension away because look what she's doing with it. Yeah, it would be a proud day in court when I tell them exactly what I'm doing with it. So we've got a lot of work to do. We've not ended the wars. I can't believe we are here 10 years later. We've still got even more troops in Afghanistan, that we have been killing record numbers of Afghans, that we still have, well, we've got 120,000 U.S. military in Afghanistan, at least 80,000 contractors. There's 80,000 NATO forces. And then the Afghan military is about 150,000 Afghan National Police and about 150,000 Afghan Army. And when you total all that up, it comes to about 550,000 people who are there for the security of Afghanistan. And yet this is the year where there have been more attacks by Afghans on U.S. and NATO forces. In fact, the last 3 weeks, there have been 3 incidents in the last 2 months that have been astounding. I mean, just this week, the United States Embassy came under attack. They say by 7 guys that were up in an unfinished building who toted up all sorts of ammunition, weapons, food, and they ended up holding at bay the U.S. military and NATO forces for over 20 hours, right there in the center of Kabul, Afghanistan. They attacked one of the largest hotels there, one of the most defended hotels, the Intercontinental Hotel. And it took NATO armed helicopters coming in, blowing up parts of the hotel over an 8-hour period before finally those who had chosen to go into that hotel were killed. The British Council offices came under attack 2 weeks ago by Taliban forces, right in the middle of Kabul, Afghanistan, the capital of Afghanistan. I mean, there's something terribly, terribly wrong. The invasion and occupation of countries, whether it be Vietnam, whether it be Iraq, whether it be Afghanistan, does not serve our national interest, as you all well know. There are other ways to make sure that international criminals are brought to justice rather than invading and occupying. I certainly hope that we have more success in the future. One of the things that when I was driving the car from the airport today, Al Sharpton was on. And, you know, I don't know if many of you watch his show. I've seen it a couple of times, but good old Al, you know, he always comes up with some little twist on something. And, you know, he was saying that, you know, in order to really defeat the forces that we're facing, the forces of war, the forces of the military-industrial complex, we really have got to come at it a different way. He said, this thing of standing out on the street corners with our bullhorns, you know, that's not going to really affect the change when we see that we're up against a media complex that has endless amounts of money, that is really saturating the airwaves, that has such influence on our Congress and on our executive. He didn't quite say, well, he's one of the people that now is on MSNBC, and for a couple of hours a night there's a little alternative view of the world. It's up to us to make sure that there are more forces out there like him, like that are trying to get places on a much higher level in the media, so that we can really push this message. But it doesn't mean that I'm giving up my bullhorn. Heavens no. And in fact, on October 6th, I'll be out there with David and how many other people are going to. And we invite all of you. You know, it's only a 2.5 hour ride into Washington, and we're going to need lots of people. If we're going to hang on to Freedom Plaza for a long enough period to really make a difference, to really show the administration and the Congress that we mean business, that we want these wars stopped, that we want equity for everyone in our country and in the world. It's going to take a lot of us taking time out of our lives to come to sit. Did you know that we have a place called Freedom Plaza in Washington? Would you believe it? It's there. It's right across, I hate to say it, from the Ronald Reagan building. But it's there, and we're going to hold it on October 6th and as long as we can. So we hope that all of you all will make some trip there, even if it's only for an afternoon or for an evening. We're going to need lots and lots of people to hold that place. So the moral of my little story is that, yeah, there is this big old military-industrial complex. It's big and mighty, and it's well-funded with our tax money. And we've got to get it to the end. We've got to stop it all, and I know that somehow we're going to get it done for us and for our future generations. Thank you.